the world a better place. And so please join me in welcoming to the stage the 54th Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan.
Anything but a weirdo. I think that's the nicest thing you've ever said about me, John.
Well, you know, when I was your chief of staff, I was the bad news guy. So today it's the good news. You're not a weirdo.
That's right.
Well, so
it's good to see you. This is a beautiful building, by the way. This is great. They build all the cool stuff after you leave. That's just how it always seems to work.
It's true. When I was at Georgetown, not only did we not have a school of public policy, but the public policy program was, smooshed into just a couple of offices in Old North. So it's come a long way. And Tom, thank you for having us here. So Paul, let's talk a little bit about where we are. It's been 100 or so days into the new Trump administration and a new Congress. There's obviously a lot of challenges that we see in the broader economy, but in terms of the fiscal situation, what do you see, and where do you think we are?
Yeah, so it's kind of hard to divorce the fiscal situation from sort of the economic moment and the trade, moment. But the fiscal situation is deteriorating rapidly, given the fact that we have just so many unfunded liabilities. We have the drivers of our debt are basically our entitlement programs. And they have gone unreformed or undealt with for so long that if you want to, I'll try to be brief, but 2/3 of our budget's on autopilot. And that's the stuff that is what we call the social contract. And I would argue that we, as in Americans and as Republicans and Democrats, basically agree with the social contract. We want to have it. We've had a lot of litigation politically on this thing over years. We debated the Great Society, the New Deal, all of these things, Obamacare. We've, I think, settled into a consensus, both parties, that this social contract, which I'll just quickly describe as health and retirement security and a safety net for the poor. Let's just say it's that, because that's basically what it is. And we basically agree this is something government should do. Now, where we're going to disagree is in how it does it. Maybe in some instances, should it be state or federal, who's the primary? But that government should do this is not really a dispute anymore. So the problem with this is these programs were basically designed in the 20th century and structured in a way that is proving unsustainable in the 21st century. And they are driving us to a debt crisis, to the point where they themselves, these programs themselves will be unraveled. They will disintegrate in that they'll go bankrupt, and we'll renege on these promises, this social contract, if we don't get ahead of it and fix these problems. The good news is, since we started this social contract, starting in 1932 with Social Security, 1965 with Medicaid and Medicare, et cetera, we've learned a lot about how to better run, social insurance programs, retirement programs, healthcare programs. Problem is, we haven't really applied those lessons because of unserious politics, I would say. Now, it's not for lack of some of us who try to do this, but it has become considered just politically taboo. It's counter to populism. It's counter to some ideologies to try and do anything to affect these programs. Because if you do, you will run into a demagogic wave of attacks politically that will make people who are on these programs think they're being taken away from them. Never mind the fact that you can reform these programs in such a way that doesn't affect people in or near retirement or using these benefits, but just the mere act of trying to reform them in any way, even to make them better, I would argue, is so politically difficult. It's considered so politically difficult that it's just not done. And so we're walking ourselves into a debt crisis.
Yeah, I still recall during, I believe, the 2012 campaign that a gentleman dressed something like you are presently may have pushed a little old lady off a cliff.
Yeah, in a wheelchair.
Yeah. And so the thought that...
that was a TV ad that was run nationwide, saying that some guy who looked like me was trying to throw grandma off a cliff. They were effective politics then, and they are effective politics now.
Yeah. So as we look around that political dynamic today, where the president has taken off the table any changes to, depending on the day, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, how do you think we might get to a point where we can address are there ways to address the deficit and debt problem without addressing those programs?
There really aren't. some people say, oh, geez, you just don't like, high taxes and things like that. You literally cannot tax your way out of this. This is mathematically not possible. And if you try, you end up killing the economy. You still have to have economic growth, right? So your society continues to move and grow. The fact of the matter is, the way that these programs are designed, as I mentioned, are what is driving us toward a debt crisis. What is a debt crisis? That's the other question. What does that mean? It means we can't keep borrowing money to finance these programs at these rates, or that we can't even borrow it, and that our Federal Reserve will resort to printing money to pay for our debt, and that's inflation. That's monetizing debt. What that looks like is, you probably have a Treasury auction failure, or two or three, where Treasury goes out, they're floating $573 billion of paper a week now, which is an enormous amount of money that we need people to buy. We need people being, China and Japan and pension funds and people. And at that rate, these are bills, bonds, and notes. There's longer and shorter duration Treasury instruments. But it's conceivable that there's so much debt worth putting out there in the marketplace. Don't forget, all the other first world countries have the same problem we have. They have aging baby boomers. They have entitlement social welfare state programs that aren't funded, that they need to finance with debt. So they're bringing their debt to the market as well. And then, corporations, everybody else are bringing debt to the market. So you could have an oversupply of debt, and then you could have a Treasury auction fail, meaning it doesn't get fulfilled. And in those moments, it's literally like in hours of a day, what would happen would be the Federal Reserve would step in and buy that debt. And that means they're monetizing the debt. That's not something that they would do for monetary policy purposes, for forward guidance. It's something they would do under duress in a crisis. And that is where we think the bond market vigilantes come back. That's where the bond markets turn on us. In other words, that's where we have real big interest rate spikes. We go into a recession. And then we have to do sort of ugly, radical, short-term budget surgery, which is, if you think it's politically painful now to even talk about these things, that would be extraordinarily politically painful. So hopefully we can get ahead of that and prevent that from happening and head it off at the pass and restructure these programs in a way that does guarantee that they are there for those who are in and near retirement as they're currently designed, so that the government keeps its promise that it made to them that they organize their lives around, and then prospectively reforms these programs in a way that you guys are, what are you, millennials? I'm not X-Gen, so basically the X-Gen on down. My generation on down is where you have to say to us, these programs are going to look a little different than they do now, because they're just not sustainable. And if we reform them for your generation, for when you retire, we can still fulfill these missions. We can make them work better, but more efficiently. And there are ways of doing that. So that we can guarantee your moms and dads and your grandparents get what they have coming to them that they already retired and already organized their lives around. That's the sort of serious conversation you have to have, but that is not the kind of conversation we're anywhere close to having. To give you a little measurement of this, we were just talking, Jonathan was our policy director of the budget committee when I was budget chair. The last budget we passed when I was chair of the budget committee was in 2015, and we cut $6.4 trillion out of the budget baseline then, and we balanced the budget and we paid off the debt over 30 years. We raised the retirement age, we means tested and did premium support for Medicare, we did a per capita block grant on Medicaid, we did all these sort of entitlement reform program changes. None of us lost our seats over it. We had these ugly ads run against us, but none of us lost our seats over it. But that was, we had good vote count, full, easy, Republican majority, $6.4 trillion out of then a $49 trillion spending baseline. They're struggling right now, to cut $1.5 to $2 trillion out of an $89 billion baseline today. So if you basically took the budget we passed with, 230 votes, something like that. I think we had a 245 seat majority that year. Probably lost, 8 or 9 votes. So we probably passed it with 230 some votes. That would be the equivalent of a $11 trillion cut today. It's really not a cut. It's just a savings. So just think, they're struggling for 1.5, and we would have been able to pass basically 12. If we took that budget today, it would be a $12 trillion savings budget. We're not even close to that. That is not where we are as a party today, but it's not where any dialogue is today. And regrettably, if we don't get serious about the budget pretty soon, we could have that debt crisis. What's the way out of it? I'm sorry, I won't filibuster you, John, I'm sorry. I think the Fiscal Commission is the only shot we have because Congress won't do it. And you have a president in his last term, and yes, it is his last term, and that's the time to do it. You know, where there's somebody who's lame duck, who doesn't have to face voters again, who's looking for legacy, and what better a legacy than to prevent your country from having a debt crisis, preserve the dollar as a global reserve currency, and guarantee the entitlement programs are there for future generations. That's a heck of a legacy, but it takes going against what people think are popular politics.
We've talked a bit about the spending side of the ledger primarily. Obviously, right now, the big fiscal conversation in Congress is in a different place. They're talking very much about the tax side of the economy. And as I was preparing for today, I went and looked back up just to refresh myself on sort of what the historical average has been in terms of how much taxation we as a government have been able to impose on a sustainable basis. And so from 1975 to 2024, so the last complete year, the average percentage of the economy that the federal government has taxed is a little over 17%. And then I looked at what the CBO's projection of what that percentage would be today. It's about 17%. And so can you talk a little bit about what role you think revenue plays in addressing this? And
well, the spending line historically was 20%. Now it's up to 24%. So we're about 4 points higher because of just the things government has done lately, COVID and all the rest of it. The question, this question, I think is really important. I think it comes down to what is your revenue maximizing line that you can have for your government while still trying to maximize your economic growth. Because if you say, well, let's just get to 24% of GDP, balance the budget will be there, you'll kill your economy if you do that. You'll kill upward mobility, jobs, economic growth. So I guess the question is can you get a higher percent of GDP revenue system for the country that is 18 or 19 or 20% of GDP? That's to me about the upper end, probably 20, without hurting economic growth. I think the answer is yes. But you have to reform the way we tax ourselves. And the current system is just too full of loopholes, too opaque to do that. And I think if you go toward more of a consumption-based system, you can get there. And you can still have what I think we have a consensus for progressive income taxation. You can still have a progressive income tax, which I think is where the country wants to be. I'm more of a flat taxer myself, but you just have to concede reality there because I think you have better economic growth under that. You can have a progressive income tax that is like a consumption tax and a consumption tax on businesses. We try to do the border adjustment tax, which is a consumption tax with wages being deductible. So it's a pro-labor consumption tax on businesses, which is what our first draft of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act was that. We would be in a much different place right now in the current trade environment had we done that, because it would be internationally acceptable. It wouldn't invite retaliation and trade wars. And we would have basically taxed our trade deficit. And we would have been able to have a much more competitive thing. So the point I'm trying to say is if you go to something like an X tax or a cash flow tax, these are different kinds of tax systems, I think you can hit that 20% of GDP level without sacrificing economic growth.
Get your questions ready. I've got a couple more I'm going to ask you. And let's take a step back. Why did you why did you come into public policy? Why are the things you could have engaged in? I mean, you're from a small town in Wisconsin, family that wasn't involved in politics particularly, but why did you choose to come into public policy and eventually run for office?
I fell in love with economics as a young person. I thought my dream job when I was coming out of school was to one day maybe be the chief economist at R.W. Baird in Milwaukee, which is, an investment firm we have there. And I thought that I wanted to go to Chicago to get my doctorate in economics. University of Chicago it's near where I live, and it's got a great econ department. And that was sort of my thinking. And then I came out here as an econ policy analyst for a Senate, my home state senator, a guy named Bob Caston. He loses his next election to Russ Feingold, the guy who lived down the street from me in Janesville. And then I went to work for Jack Kemp at his think tank here in town. You guys are probably too young to know who Jack Kemp was. Okay, a couple nods. Jack Kemp was basically, I'd say, the first supply sider in Congress. a dynamic growth supply side. He was sort of the founder of Reaganomics. And he became my mentor. I lost my dad when I was a kid, so I always grew up with mentors. He became my mentor, and he could tell I had a passion for public policy, but I was just thinking of D.C. as sort of a step in between, going back to school. And he encouraged me, I was 27 at the time, to get in the game, get into politics, be a policymaker. And he told me basically at this age in America, you can make a big difference. So I went home when I was 27 and ran for Congress, and I ended up winning my race. I turned 28 during the election, but it was for my 5-year career as a staffer here in D.C. that I learned you can make a big difference at a young age in this country. I had written some amendments that became law as a staff guy, and just worked on a lot of issues. And so I learned early on that you can make a huge impact applying yourself. And I would say today, you probably look at the landscape and think, man, this is, kabuki theater. This is, nothing but populism and, owning the libs or doing whatever. This is like Instagram policy. That is where we are right now. That's the moment we're in. We have more entertainers than legislators in the legislature than ever before. But you got to look at the trends that are coming. This is not sustainable. This sort of, vacuous populism, entertainment-like quality to government and politics is not sustainable. And what is going to be needed in this country are people who are policymakers, are people who care about policy, who have deeply held principles that they believe in, that they want to go advocate for and apply them to problems, to come up with solutions to solve those problems. The country's going to need that really soon. So I think, frankly, it's a good time to get into this. I think it's a good time to be an aspiring policymaker, whether you want to run for office or just or serve in the staff capacity. I did both. You have this amazing
Staff's
career.
better.
Yeah, it probably is.
No one has ever protested outside my house.
Yeah, you don't get bomb threats every other month, and you don't get all these death threats. That's right. So, I think it's a growth. I think it's the time to go. So it's typically the cycle, right? So it's just like buying the dip. Buy the dip. The dip right now is we are intellectually a little less than we ought to be as a country in policymaking. So we're in the dip. So go buy the dip and become great policymakers. So when you come out of here at McCourt School, you're going to be running the country in 3 years, because we're going to need smart, policy-minded people to do that.
Yeah. Well, one last question from me. One of the things that I was always impressed with you is that your Catholic faith very much informed how you approach public policy. Obviously, with the passing of Pope Francis, the church is at a crossroads, and we'll see who the next pope is. But how do you think about your faith and public policy and how those connect?
Yeah, so I take that very seriously. So I don't know you're probably not all Catholics, even though you're in a Catholic university. I teach at Notre Dame. I'm on the faculty of the econ department at Notre Dame. So I taught a class for a couple of semesters on.
I appreciate no one booing Notre Dame.
Yeah, sorry. It's totally class.
That's more discipline than I would have exhibited when I was a student, but.
I taught a class on Catholic social teaching, the morality of capitalism. And so if you take a look at the social magisterium, which is the body of all the documents that the Catholic Church has produced, and the epistemology that comes from that, and the way lay Catholics operate themselves in public life and in private life, it gives you this beautiful mosaic. It gives you this beautiful philosophy of getting involved in making your community better. We have this principle we call subsidiarity, which is, make a difference where you are. And the closer you are to a problem, the more you can solve that problem, the better you can solve that problem. And people coming together to do that is really good for people and society. We have this other principle that is in conjunction with it called solidarity, which is a sense that we are all in things together, and that we want to have and champion causes bigger than ourselves. We want to make the world better, not just for ourselves, but for other people. And so these principles in conjunction with one another, and there's a compendium on this for people in public life, and that includes staff people, on how to sort of advance these things. And we use prudential judgment in that. There was this nun that used to protest me all the time. Sister, what was her name? Sister Simone, nuns on the bus. And she's a real left-winger, and I'm a conservative, but we're both Catholics. And we like each other, don't agree with each other, but the point about the Catholic Church is, in exercising your prudential judgment, there's lots of room for discretion to have differences of opinion on how to achieve goals. You know what I mean? So that's what that means is it provides you a roadmap on how to be civil, on how to promote civil society and advance things that you believe in, especially with people who aren't like you or don't think like you. And the Catholic social teaching really accommodates that. And so to me, it's a great roadmap for how to conduct yourself in public life. For sure, I fell short on this all the time, but it gives you, an aspiration to achieve.
All right, let's open it up to questions. If folks could stand up, introduce yourself, and actually ask a question. So we'll start with you.
No lectures, questions, right? Yeah.
Laura Blessing.
Oh, there's a microphone.
Usually pretty loud. Laura Blessing, I teach here. I was wondering if you could talk about the ways that you think Trump's tax politics are both orthodox and heterodox for a Republican, whether that be policy, rhetoric,
Or populism.
larger. It's a 30,000-foot question. Coordination with the party or coordination with larger coalitions.
Sounds like you're writing a piece on this.
I am writing a book. I'd love to interview you.
Yeah, so okay. I think I understand, but no, give her the mic. Just give me a little more clarity on what exactly you're asking for. So.
Oh, sure. I mean, I've got an answer for that question, but you're...
No. I'm not asking you for the answer, but are you saying Trump's politics on taxes? I think it's a little bit what's good for economic growth, what's good for vote coalitions that he assembled in the campaign, and then what? Is that...
Sure. What's typical and atypical for a Republican? So,
Oh, okay.
I mean, for me, I'm thinking, cuts to progressive top marginal rates is typical. Tariffs are atypical.
Yeah.
I want to hear...
Okay, so from a doctrine standpoint, yeah, I'd say it's more driven. I think the later part of his tax policy is more populist. On trade is clearly mercantilism. I actually call myself a free trader still. Even though it's not popular in my party right now. I don't. So I think you should throw tariffs in there as a tax policy item because it is a tax. Yeah. I agree with that. I think the campaign promises were more demand-side tax cuts. The FICA tax on tips, the deductibility of interest on loans for cars, and the third one was overtime. Yeah, and Social Security benefits. That's actually kind of a marginal rate cut, sort of. But actually, you can't reconcile that, so they can't do that. You can't put that in reconciliation. It's Social Security. So they won't be able to fulfill that promise. So I think those are more demand-side tax cuts. I'm a supply-sider. Most Republicans are, which means we pursue tax policy that maximizes economic growth, which is on the margin, meaning rate cuts, not tax credits. So our thesis as classical liberal conservatives, so this populism is not classical liberal conservatism. As a classical liberal conservative, my goal is not to have people send money to Washington and then I send them money back to them if they do something that I approve of. That's not good economics. That's demand side. That's typically what the left wants. So I think people should keep the money in the first place. Keep it in the private economy, take risks, have incentives to take those risks. And when they put that money at risk, investing, creating jobs, starting new companies, that creates economic growth, that creates upward mobility, that creates jobs. So extending the Tax Cut and Jobs Act is the supply side. Those are supply side tax cuts. So he gets, in my book, an A on the credit card, on the report card. Excuse credit card. That was a little Freudian slip. He gets an A on the report card for that. The other ones are more campaign-based tax policy, I think.
All right.
How do you think he's most atypical for a Republican?
He's a populist.
Here, gentleman right there in the blue shirt.
Hello, Speaker Ryan. It's an honor to meet you. I'm Chakrapati Godlavleti, a undergraduate freshman in the School of Foreign Service.
From where?
I'm from Lexington, Kentucky.
Lexington, Kentucky, got it.
Yeah. Of course, I'm not well-versed in fiscal policy, but two criticisms of the tax jobs of the 2017 Tax Cut Jobs Act I heard was it increased the deficit by a lot, and the primary beneficiaries were wealthy, rich, or wealthy income, or high income earners.
Yeah.
What is your response?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I'll start with the second one first. It was a bigger proportional tax cut for lower and middle income taxpayers than higher income taxpayers. But again, the I is economic growth. I'm not a person who fixates on distribution tables because I think the question is, can we grow the pie? Can we grow the economy so that there's just more opportunity in the economy that people can take advantage of? And this does do that. Now, it's a fact that the top few percent of taxpayers pay the vast majority of taxes. So if you're going to cut taxes by taxpayers at any amount, you're going to have large numbers at the top because they pay most of the taxes. So it's impossible to not do that if you're reducing taxes. The question is, are you making the tax code more competitive for your economy? I think the biggest accomplishment in this bill is the permanent stuff, the stuff we did on businesses, because what we were seeing happening were we were taxing our businesses at much higher rates than the rest of the world were taxing theirs, and we taxed them in this incongruent way with respect to the rest of the world. We taxed it on what we called worldwide income, which means if you're an American company, you're paying this 35% tax rate wherever you made the money, no matter what. If all the rest of the countries, you're paying that country's tax rate. Well, the average tax rate in 2017 was 24%. Now it's 22%. We're at 21. So we were paying 35% on our companies, and they were paying an average of 24. Now they're paying 22. So we got ourselves right with the rest of the world is that we were more competitive. And the reason we could tell this was not working for us was obvious. Our revenue was going down, but we were losing our companies. It's called inversions. Lots of American companies were leaving America and re-domiciling their headquarters and moving overseas because of the uncompetitive tax code. So we fixed that and we stopped those inversions. So the proof is in the pudding, which is it really worked. At the same time, our goal was to try and increase productivity for workers, which if you do that, you increase living standards, you increase wages. And the bottom two income quintiles were the fastest real wage growth that we had seen in a generation. And then COVID hit and kind of obviously screwed all that up. But we saw great wage gains by low-income workers because the tax code made the economy much more productive, and they got higher wage increases that exceeded inflation. And that was exactly what we were hoping to achieve. So now I think it'd be a disaster if you let this thing expire. Look, we're already flirting with recession and uncertainty driven by trade. You stick this tax increase on top of there, we're for sure having a recession. So I just don't think that's in anyone's interest.
Let's take one from over here. Green dress, or green blouse.
Hi, thank you for being here. I'm curious if you can speak.
Name and where you're from.
I'm Caitlin. I'm a first-year MPP student, originally from Texas. I'll be interning with the Senate Budget Committee in a couple weeks, so this is a very interesting conversation.
Minority or majority?
Minority.
That's Bernie, right?
Bernie's over at Help Now.
No, it's Jeff Merkley.
Okay.
I'm curious if you can speak to the debate about current policy baseline versus current law baseline. That's something I've been.
I'm a House guy.
That is a nerdy question.
It's a nerdy question. Yeah, I'm a House guy. I like the House position.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I just quickly answered your question. Yeah.
Right here.
Which one's you?
The gentleman with the gold chain. I just like the chain.
Yeah, see, we're bling, you get called on. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Nisi Kanthu. I'm a Master Public Policy student as well as getting an MBA at McCourt School of Business. Last I saw you, you were speaking to Peter Orzag at the Brookings Institute talking about the extension of TCGA. My question's about, well, I have two questions. My first question is about the destination-based cash flow tax. I think taxing cash flows is brilliant, as well as with the border adjustment. And I think there's bipartisan support for it. I think Bill Gale, Jason Furman love it.
Yeah. No, Furman and I have talked about this a bunch. Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. I guess on the border adjustment specifically, Elena Patel just put out a piece at Brookings kind of advocating for it. Do you think that'll be part of the extension?
No.
Talk? No? Okay. Oh, that's easy. Okay, so then the second question would be...
He's on fire, I tell you.
Okay. The second question will be, so I think you know the president pretty well. That's an assumption.
Yeah, we don't get along great these days, but I do know him well, yes. Yeah.
Who do you think has his ear? Is it Navarro? Is it Besant? Is it Moran? Is it the bond market?
Ask me the day. The bond market definitely has his ear. These are great questions. So go back to so just so everybody knows what he's talking about. Jonathan and I and Kevin floated with Kevin Brady. Then I used to be chair of the Ways and Means Committee, which is the tax writing committee, where we worked on this plan and then became speaker. And then my successor, a guy named Kevin Brady, we jointly floated for the first version of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and we knew it was a bit of a pipe dream, but we still wanted to give it the old college try. A border adjustment tax, which is a cash flow tax. What does that mean? It means your business taxation is basically a consumption tax. You by exempting savings and investment from taxation, you're effectively taxing consumption, but at the business entity level. Lots of other countries do it. And what we did was we border adjusted. What does that mean? You put the tax on your imports, you take the tax off of your exports. And because we made wages deductible, which is pro-labor, it means if you hire people, you can deduct that expense, so hire more people. And so it basically it's a very efficient tax. You can tax ourselves at a very competitive rate with respect to the rest of the world. And the rest of the world has tax systems that are similar to this, but not exactly the same. And what that is they have VATs, value-added taxes. A border adjustment tax is a VAT except for the wage deductibility part. So it's a kissing cousin to the VAT tax, a very efficient tax. And what the other countries have that we don't, and that's why I thought this was a really good idea, is they've got an income tax on companies and a VAT tax on top because they have much more government. As a result, I would strongly argue slower economic growth. So what we were thinking was, well, why don't we just replace our corporate income tax with a border adjustment tax? And by the way, we can try to reset global trade in a way that's more gradual, that is pro-manufacturing, pro-U.S. labor, pro-jobs. And we had this really big trade deficit, which is, well, heck, that's a pretty good tax base. Tax the trade deficit to lower our rates and give us a really economically competitive tax system. And the rest of the world's congruent with it. They do that too. All these other countries have VATs that border adjust. So one of Trump's biggest complaints about these other countries, he calls it a non-tariff barrier, are the VAT border adjustments. Well, those have been declared legal since the WTO was formed. And so if we did a border adjustment tax, no other country really could complain about it because they do it too. And we would have a better system that raises more money. So but that took me like 10 sentences. That's the problem with policy these days. And the reason I say lost this fight is because the retailers came out of the woodwork to oppose it. So senators from the Walmart states, that's Arkansas, senators from the Home Depot state, that's Georgia, California, everybody was opposed to it because look what retailers are saying right now. 145% tariff on China, all this stuff, they're freaking out. They were freaking out with the border adjustment tax. But if you do it in an across-the-board way, like in a border adjustment tax, any good economist will tell you exchange rates will wash that out and adjust. That was a pretty hard argument for them to accept. And so we didn't get that passed. We always knew it was going to be hard. But we always knew if we led with SALT and the other base broaders we had for the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act for a year, we wouldn't get it passed. So we had been in these tax fights for years. That's the benefit of being around for a while. We sort of knew how to stick the landing in the Tax Cuts for Jobs Act, and the way we did it is how we were able to succeed in doing it. But I would do that again. I think it's better than the tariff gambit, and I think it scratches the same itch in a much more economically efficient way. And I think it gets a superior tax code, which you could get at better revenues. But there's just no. They're trying to do this with a 3-vote margin in the House. There's no way they're going to do that. They're just going to get an extension. And so I don't think that that's in the cards right now. If you had a fiscal commission, if you had a little longer time, and if you had some bipartisan, because there is bipartisan support for this idea, you could probably get there. Sorry, that was a long answer to your question.
Polka dot dress.
Hi there, my name's Marina. I'm a senior in undergrad at Georgetown.
From where?
From California.
Yeah.
And my question is, how do you escape the narrative that the Republican Party is the party of the rich, when I'd argue a lot of Americans see people like Elon Musk and a lot of other Trumps?
I think we already escaped it. Look who voted for us.
Sure.
Yeah.
But I just argue in this climate right now when we're seeing the cost of living increase so much, and a lot of people are suffering, and small business owners are suffering because of the tariffs. I mean, I guess you're right, it's populism, but how can we reconcile the cuts to Medicaid and also the lack of these more aggressive progressive income taxes and continue to say that we're the party of everyday Americans?
Well, I think the proof is in the pudding. Look at the votes. Look at who voted for Republicans in this last election. So it shows you who's got what party. I think what the progressives did was they got sideways on the culture. No, this stuff always changes. There's always churn. There's always changing vote coalitions. I mean, I've been through 3 or 4 of these vote coalition changes. So, right now, the Republican Party is the party of the forgotten man, the blue collar person, and we swapped out higher educated voters for those blue collar voters. If you just look at voting trends, that's Wisconsin right there in a nutshell. So your policy questions are, first, if you don't get savings from entitlement programs by reforming those programs, you will have a debt crisis. I would not call this what's being considered cuts to Medicaid. Medicaid grew at unsustainable rates in the Biden administration. I mean, really big rates. So I think you can reform this program much better and save money in doing that. And that's what should be driving the policy reforms. You can increase spending at Medicaid at a slower rate than is presently planned and still deliver a good program. So that's point one. Point two, you got to remember if you try to achieve what I would call a political end of equalizing the outcome of people's lives, you're gonna make society more divisive and less prosperous. But if you promote a philosophy where you want to promote equality of opportunity so people can make the most of their lives, you're going to have disequal outcomes, but more prosperity and probably higher upper mobility and more happiness. But people will have different outcome in their lives, and you have to be okay with that. And there's a philosophical problem, I think, between our two parties on that particular point, and it lends to the kinds of politics that you're describing.
I have one of those jerseys, yes. You, sir. That's right, I'm just picking people based on clothing, I admit it.
Varun Halabi, I'm a graduating Master's of Policy Management student here from Detroit, Michigan. Through another institute here at Georgetown, I got the chance to work with former Congressman from Illinois, Rodney Davis, last semester.
Great guy, wonderful person.
And one thing that he would describe that you used to do when you would caucus with all the Republicans is you would draw a python on a whiteboard.
Yeah.
And then you draw a bulge in the python.
The pig in the python, I called it.
The pig in the python. And you said the pig in the python, in terms of entitlement spending, was the baby boomers. And if once the pig in the python passed, then this problem could potentially rectify.
It's a euphemistic way for saying people die, but yes.
Do you still believe that?
I do.
And do you see that as the chance to kind of strike when the iron is hot for entitlement reform?
Yeah, so I worry we're getting close to missing the window. And so what Rodney, I would spend a lot of time with House Republicans to show them how to do town hall meetings to sell entitlement reform to their constituents. And so the pig in the python, if I had a chart behind me, you would show the debt. And the debt goes up a lot with boomers because we're going from 40 million retirees to 77 million in one generation, with a drop in birth rates behind them. And what happens is if you reform these programs for at least part of for 55 on below, let's just say that. I think that's what we did. We had 55 below. I'm actually 55 years old. If you did 55 and below, and you give us a new system, which is more, from an economic standpoint, looks like more of a defined contribution system, where you can quantify the growth rate of these entitlement programs, on an accrual basis, you're forwarding tens of trillions of dollars of debt reduction. The bond markets, I strongly would argue, and the bond traders all say this, will give you credit for that. So if today we pass legislation that says people who are 55 and below are going to have a Social Security system that has some means testing, it changes the retirement age and does a few other things, and Medicare has the age, reflects longevity tables, and we go to a means-tested program and a premium support system, which I think is the best way to go. And Medicaid is more of a per capita block grant where we send the money back to the states based on their population with health inflation, growth cap on it. You do just those three things right there, basically, that saves you from a debt crisis. It says that those of us who are 55 and below, we know what the programs are going to look like when we retire at 69 or 68, whatever that retirement age is. And what it does is it gives us the ability to go into the bond markets and borrow for the baby boomers, the pig and the python. Because the bond markets say, oh, you passed this law, this permanent law that says starting in 10 years, you're changing the trajectory of spending from here to here. And that means I'm going to give you credit for all that savings now, and I'll let you, America, go borrow for those baby boomers at these cheap rates and maintain your global reserve currency, because we are now convinced, because you passed permanent law, that you're going to pay your bonds, you're going to pay your debts. Because we see, like anybody else does on an actuarial table, once those boomers cycle off, that's the word. Once they cycle off, you're back down to like a 30% of GDP debt to GDP ratio. And that's totally workable, and that's what our bills did. And so that's our argument is, go now, a stitch in time saves 9, and pass this. The problem is, I don't know how much time we have left to do that. I honestly don't know the answer to that question. If we go to a recession, which, let's just say we go into a tariff-driven recession, every time we have a recession, it forwards these numbers. It gives us a step function increase in this deterioration of our balance sheet. And that in and of itself could bring this day, forward faster. Day meaning auction failures, debt crisis, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I think we have time for 2 more questions. So
sorry, I'll keep my answers short.
Both questions and answers brief. Go, that gentleman in the back.
My name's Corbin. I'm from DC. Undergraduate
Oh, the TV guy needs to have the mic.
My name is Corbin. I'm from Washington, D.C., undergraduate at the college. A lot of the discussion for the new reconciliation bill has included reducing some of the IRA's tax credits for as pay-fors. So I was wondering if you can discuss the Republican thought process for balancing business certainty and not concern with having tax credits reduced with pay-fors.
I can't give you a great answer because I haven't studied it that closely. You won't get savings. Well, some of that, they turn discretionary spending into mandatory savings. So there's spending cuts they can put in there that they can bank.
Some of that, yes.
Some of it. Most of it's the tax credit stuff. So from a policy standpoint, my belief and understanding would be the way these things work, they're placed in service tax credits. Like, so let's say you're going to put up a wind farm. If you put that thing in the ground today, you get your wind farm tax credits for 10 years placed in service. So as I understand the policy to be, they'll say prospectively no more of those. So if this year I get the wind farm in, I get the tax credits for 10 years. But if they say as of 2026, no deal, then no more of that. I think you can scrape, I don't know what the number is, so I haven't seen the score. Have you?
Yeah, I mean, it's not, I think the reality is that the IRA tax credits are not going to be of sufficient magnitude.
It's not that big, I don't think. Yeah, I don't think it's a huge score. So I don't see a big score coming from that, and the savings stuff would be like single-digit billions, I think. So I don't see massive savings from that, but that's how you would do it.
And one last question. The benefit of sitting in the front row.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, and thanks for coming to speak to us. I'm Andrew Eichen, originally from New Jersey. So I wanted to ask you about something you said earlier related to not caring as much about distribution. And so, look, I agree with you, obviously. Like, we can't redistribute our way out of everything. We need to grow as a country. But I also question if growth alone is enough to help all Americans.
No. Yeah.
So we've had incredible growth in this country in the 90s. We just had insane growth, and yet we have some of the highest poverty rates of any developed country in the world. And so just to make
it's a great question. It's a great question. In my early days, I would have gotten offended or something like that. Just gotten my libertarian ire up. But I think you're right. What I mean, in the context of tax policy, you cannot let distribution tables rule the day, because if you do that, you'll run out of people to tax, and you'll end up just destroying your economy. So, and you got to remember how lopsided our tax code is today. Who pays taxes? It's so lopsided. And so what I mean when I say that is you want to have a tax code that is as broad-based as possible, as efficient as possible to maximize economic growth and revenue at the same time. That's why this discussion of cash flow taxes. At the point you made is, I don't think tax policy is the best place to focus on opportunity, upward mobility, and poverty alleviation. I do think there are a couple credits that make a big difference, the earned income credit, the child tax credit. But this is what I work on at Notre Dame and at AEI. I'm at a think tank here in town called the American Enterprise Institute. I do believe that our safety net is in dire need of reform, doesn't work very well. It's a 20th century jalopy that could be fixed so much more, wired toward upward mobility. And I spend most of my academic time now on poverty policy and upward mobility. I wrote the Evidence Act. The last bill we wrote was the Evidence Act, which is to use evidence in poverty policy to pursue outcomes and inform policymaking.
And of course, at the American Idea Foundation, you fund a lot of research into what interventions are working.
So our foundation that John is on the board of, that I chair, we finance randomized control trials on poverty programs that we think have promise, to see how well they do, so that if they do well, we want to franchise and scale and replicate them around the country. And we do this in conjunction with, in many cases, not always, with Notre Dame economists. Sorry to the judges, Holy Cross guys. But what the point I'm trying to make is, I think we should have a strong primary emphasis on the poor in this country as public policy makers. I don't think the tax code is the place to do it. I think the tax code has a couple features that can be helpful, but if you think redistribution of the tax code is the way to fix this, you're missing the ball, in my opinion, because you're going to screw up economic growth. You want upward mobility. The big project that we're working on at the American Idea Foundation is to digitize the social safety net, to build a digital wallet for the poor, to have their safety net built into it with programmable benefits, but also with algorithms that smooth out the benefit cliffs so that you do not block upward mobility. One of the biggest frustrations of mine in this policy, and I'll stop talking soon, I can tell you, give me the hook here, is we have these 20th century social welfare benefits. They're all really well intended, but our poverty rates are like the same. We have the same poverty rate since we started the war on poverty like 55 years ago, and we're $15 trillion in spending later. So that's why we did this Evidence Act, because if we measure success in the war on poverty on just throwing money at the problem or creating new programs and not measuring whether people are actually getting out of poverty, we're measuring it the wrong way. So let's focus on results and outcomes, not on inputs. The reason I say that is, I think you can switch this poverty system we have to try and alleviate it with what we now know in economics and in technology to a far better performing system. And the problem, in a nutshell, is in the 20th century, it's cookie cutter. Single mom, 2 kids, she's got a job. Let's say she gets a raise at that job. Or maybe she'll take a second job, and she'll calculate in her mind rationally, if I take this raise, I'm losing my child care benefits because of the benefit cutoffs. So I'm staying where I am. I'm not going to rise. I'm just going to stay right here, because I'll lose more than I gain by taking this risk and working longer hours and being away from my kids. And you don't want our safety net to force people into those kinds of decisions. Well, in the 20th century, there's not a lot we can do about it. Now, with blockchain, with digitization, we can fix that problem. We can algorithmically smooth out the benefit cliff. So when she gets that raise, her benefits reduce by an amount that always makes it pay to take that step, to get the raise. You're only going to lose 20% of your child care benefits if you take this raise, not 100%. I mean, the disability thing, I can go on and on. The point I'm trying to make is, I think we should focus on poverty. We should focus on upward mobility. But if we think about redistribution of income through the tax code, we're gonna kill the golden goose, which is a growing economy. And let's focus more on specific programs that we think and test and know will work, and do those in a 21st century way with good technology and smart economics to build a safety net that is wired for upward mobility. That's where I think the premise and the focus ought to be.
So I think I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative and ask one last question, which the Evidence Act that you noted was a bipartisan project with Senator Murray. Can you speak for a moment just about sort of what you learned about bipartisanship over the course of your career?
So it was kind of where I was. So remember when we were at Ways and Means, the disability program was going bankrupt, and you had this situation. I actually learned it through a friend of mine who was an electrician in Janesville, Wisconsin, who fell 2 stories, got paralyzed from the sternum on down, couldn't be an electrician anymore. And the disability program in that year said, if you make $1,060 a month in outside income, you can keep your disability payments. So we had another friend who was an accountant who said, hey, come work with me during tax season and I'll pay you a few grand a month to just help me with all this tax stuff. Learn how to run the program and do it, because the guy can type and think, and he just couldn't. He was in a wheelchair. So he did that, and if you make $1,061 a month in outside income, you lose your disability benefits. It was just totally ridiculous. So we had this rational thinking, which was, we talked to some behavioral economists. Well, let's have a benefit offset For every $3 of outside income you make, you lose $1 in benefit. It helps us bring balance to the disability program. These people are better off. It is voluntary. It was like the end of the world was being proposed. The disability community did sit-ins in my church at Mass. You know, my priest had to have all these people. I mean, just you name the kind of protests, we got it. And what I learned was, if you go into these fights in poverty policy straight in, it becomes mired in political, ideological, knife fights. And so the stalemate we've had in public policy has been hyper-ideological, hyper-partisan. And so I thought, let's take a step back and figure out, can we just look at evidence? So we figured, let's just get a little pilot project and see if this idea works. And if it works, then we should all be for it. So that's where Patty Murray, who is a buddy of mine, she's a Democrat, progressive from Washington State. We did a few budget deals together because she was my counterpart in the Senate. We said, let's just do a commission to figure out how to release all the federal data in these areas so we can measure its progress. And then we can make informed decisions as policymakers as to what works and what doesn't work. And try and leach out of the process the partisanship, the ideology, because every time we got into these fights, especially in the safety net, it became quickly partisan and quickly ideological, and therefore nothing got done, nothing got solved. And so the other one positive example was MCV, this early childhood infant program, where we would send nurses in to poor expecting mothers who had no experience at prenatal care to sort of teach them how to do prenatal care and postnatal. And we ran a randomized control trial on it, collected a lot of data. It was a Bush administration initiative, and it really was successful. So Bush built it, Obama doubled it, and Trump kept it. Why? Because, and those are three very different people, take my word for it. Why? Because the evidence was really clear this thing works. And that was like 1% of all federal poverty programs that went through this kind of an analysis. So Patty and I did this commission. It said, here is how we propose you release this data in a privacy compliant way so data scientists and economists can look at this data and measure what works and what doesn't. And then we passed the commission's findings, most of them, in a law called the Evidence Act, which is now being rolled out across the federal government. And the thinking here is, let's get past, who's doing what party, what ideology, and let's what works. We agree, we want a safety net. Okay, we want people out of poverty. We want to go at the root causes of poverty to break the cycle of poverty. How does it, what works? And that's hopefully where we can go to and leapfrog this partisan stalemate that we've had.
Great. Thank you, Paul. And please join me in thanking Paul for his time.
Yeah, thank you, John.
So thank you, Speaker Ryan. Thank you, Jonathan. And thank you to all of you for joining us this afternoon for what was a wonderful conversation.